Did John Lennon record the first rap song in history and hide it from the world? London, January 1970. Abbey Road Studios. Studio 2. The room was quiet. Not the usual bustling quiet of a recording session in progress, but the deep, almost reverent silence of a space that had recently witnessed the end of an era. The Beatles had effectively ceased to exist. The final, bitter legal battles were still to come, but the music, the collaboration, the specific alchemy of four men in this room was over. John Lennon was alone in it. Not physically alone. There was a young engineer named Geoff Emerick, a veteran of countless Beatles sessions, sitting behind the mixing desk. There was a tape op, a T-boy, the usual skeletal crew that remained when the main players had gone home. But creatively, fundamentally alone. He was working on what would become John Lennon/Plastic Ono Band, an album so raw, so stripped of the melodic prettiness that had defined the Beatles, that it would shock critics and fans alike. It was an album born of primal scream therapy, of a deliberate dismantling of everything comfortable and familiar. Abbey Road Studios, London, interior 1970, empty studio. But before the primal screams, before the raw, confessional ballads, there was something else. Something that emerged from a session that was never officially logged, never properly documented, and would remain a whisper in the Abbey Road archives for decades. It began with a specific request from John. "I need the tape machine," he had told Emerick, his voice flat, devoid of its usual playful sarcasm. "And I need a microphone. And I need everyone else out of the room." Emerick, who had seen John in every conceivable mood, recognized the particular intensity in his eyes. The look of a man who was about to do something that he understood was necessary, regardless of whether anyone else understood it. He cleared the room. The tape op left. The T-boy vanished. Emerick himself retreated to the control room, closing the soundproof door, leaving John alone on the studio floor with a single microphone and a reel of blank tape. What John did in that room, over the next 3 hours, was not singing. Not playing guitar in any conventional sense. It was something else entirely. Something that had no name yet. Something that would not have a name for another decade. He spoke, not singing, not reciting poetry, not reading lyrics. He spoke directly into the microphone, his voice raw, unmodulated, rhythmically precise in a way that was both accidental and deliberate. He spoke about his childhood, about his anger, about the hypocrisy he saw in the world, about the specific, unvarnished truth of his own experience. And he did it over a rhythmic bed of sound that he created himself, using a single distorted guitar riff played on a loop, layered with percussive elements he made by hitting the body of his acoustic guitar with his hand. It was rhythmic speech, over a beat, lyrically confrontational, emotionally direct, technically imperfect in ways that seemed chosen rather than accidental. It was, in every measurable way, a rap song. The first rap song, recorded in Abbey Road Studios in January 1970 by John Lennon. The tape was labeled in John's handwriting with a single, enigmatic word, rhyme. And then it disappeared. Not lost. Not stolen. Simply filed away in a corner of the archive, uncatalogued, unreferenced, unplayed, until a young archivist, 2 decades later, stumbled upon it during a routine inventory. A tape that would change everything music historians believed about where rap music came from, about who invented it, and about what John Lennon was doing in the quiet aftermath of the Beatles, alone in Studio 2. Speaking his truth into a microphone, years before the world had a name for what he was doing. To understand what John Lennon was doing in Studio 2 that January, you have to understand the specific landscape of his mind in 1970. He was dismantling the mythology of the Beatles, dismantling the expectations of his audience, dismantling the carefully constructed persona of the witty, charming, melodic songwriter. And he was dismantling himself. Through primal scream therapy, through the raw, uncomfortable work of genuine self-examination, he was stripping away everything that was not essential. This dismantling extended to his music. He was rejecting melody for its own sake, rejecting polish, rejecting the idea that music had to be pleasant to be true. "When you're in real pain," he had told a journalist, "you don't sing about it. You make a sound, an ugly sound, a sound that doesn't care whether it's pleasant to listen to, because pleasantness isn't the point. The point is getting the thing out." This philosophy, articulated in words, was even more revolutionary when applied to music. John Lennon/Plastic Ono Band was its first full expression, a record that stripped away everything the music industry understood as professional. The production was thin, the arrangements were skeletal, the vocals were pushed to the edges of John's comfortable range and beyond. But before the album, there was the experiment, the moment when John decided to push the boundaries of what getting the thing out actually meant. He had been listening, not to other musicians, not to conventional music, to spoken word, to poets, to the rhythmic cadences of everyday speech, to the way people expressed anger, frustration, and truth when they weren't trying to be musical. He had also been exposed to early forms of rhythmic speech over music, not in any formal sense, but through his connections in the avant-garde art world, particularly through Yoko Ono. He had encountered experimental artists who were exploring the territory between speech and song. Artists who were using their voices as percussive instruments, delivering text in rhythmic patterns over abstract soundscapes. John had a particular fascination with rhythm, not just the rhythm of drums, but the rhythm of language, the internal beat of words when they were spoken with intention. He had always been a master of lyrical rhythm, even in the Beatles' most melodic songs. But now he was pushing it further. What if the rhythm itself was the melody? What if the words, spoken with sufficient intention and placed over a compelling beat, were enough? What if the singing was simply the speaking, elevated by rhythm and amplified by emotion? These were the questions that led him to Studio 2 that January night. Alone, with a microphone, and a raw, unfiltered truth that needed to be expressed in a way that melody, with its inherent prettiness, could not contain. Emmerich, sitting in the control room, heard it all. He heard John's voice, unadorned, unfiltered, speaking with an intensity that was almost frightening. He heard the distorted guitar riff, looping endlessly. He heard the percussive slaps against the guitar body. He didn't know what it was. He had never heard anything like it. But he knew, with the specific certainty of an engineer who had spent years in the presence of genius, that he was hearing something that mattered. Something that would eventually find its place in the history of sound, even if that place had no name yet. He kept the tape rolling. For 3 hours, he recorded John Lennon speaking his truth over a beat, creating a sound that would not be recognized for another 2 decades. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like. That helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. The tape, labeled Rhyme, was a single, continuous 3-hour recording. It began with John tuning his guitar, the raw, unpolished sound of strings being stretched and tightened. Then, a distorted, almost industrial-sounding riff, played on a loop, simple and insistent. A single chord, repeated, creating a hypnotic, almost aggressive pulse. Over this, John began to speak. His voice was low at first, almost a murmur. He spoke about his mother, Julia, who had died when he was 17. Not singing about her, as he would later do in Mother. Speaking about her. The raw, unvarnished pain of abandonment and loss. They took her away. They always took them away. Left me with the ants. Left me with the rules. Left me with the silence. Left me with the shame, and they called it love. They called it family. They called it sane. The words were not poetic in any conventional sense. They were direct, confrontational, delivered with a rhythmic cadence that was both natural and deliberately structured. He was finding the beat in his own anger, the rhythm in his own pain. As the recording progressed, the intensity of John's voice increased. He spoke about the hypocrisy of the establishment, about the lies he had been told as a child, about the way the world tried to fit you into boxes that didn't fit. They want you to be quiet. They want you to be good. They want you to be happy. They want you to be understood, but they don't want the truth. They don't want the noise. They just want the pretty songs. They just want the pretty boys. Emmerich, in the control room, was mesmerized. He had never heard John speak like this. So raw, so unfiltered, so completely without the protective layer of wit or sarcasm or melodic beauty that usually accompanied his public utterances. John used the guitar not just for the riff, but for percussive effects. He hit the body of the instrument with his hand, creating a sharp, dry beat that punctuated his words. He scraped the strings, producing a harsh, almost industrial sound that added to the track's aggressive texture. He layered his own voice, not harmonizing, speaking over himself, creating a call and response between different aspects of his own psyche. The angry voice, the questioning voice, the voice that simply stated the truth without apology. The 3 hours were a continuous stream of consciousness, a raw, unfiltered outpouring of words and rhythm and anger and pain. It was not a song. It was a sonic document of a mind in the process of dismantling itself and rebuilding itself from the ground up. When John finally stopped, the silence in Studio 2 was absolute. He walked into the control room. He looked at Emmerich. Well, John asked. Emmerich, still processing what he had just heard, could only manage one word. What was that? John smiled. A small, knowing smile. That, he said, is what happens when you stop pretending. That's what happens when you let the words come out the way they want to come out. Without the melody. Without the pretty. Just the truth. He picked up the tape reel. He wrote, Rhyme, on it in his distinctive handwriting. File it, John said. Somewhere safe. For later. Emmerich filed it. Somewhere safe. For later. And for 20 years, later never came. The tape, Rhyme, was placed in a specific section of the Abbey Road archives. Not with the Beatles' master tapes. Not with John's solo album masters. In a section reserved for experimental recordings and unreleased demos that had no clear commercial purpose. It was not cataloged with the meticulous detail that usually accompanied Abbey Road's archival process. No date, no specific project name, just the single word, Rhyme, in John Lennon's handwriting. Geoff Emerick never spoke about the session publicly, not because he was sworn to secrecy, but because he understood that the recording was too raw, too personal, too far outside the boundaries of what people expected from John Lennon to be understood in the context of 1970. He knew what he had heard. He knew its significance, but he also knew that the world was not ready for it. The years passed. John Lennon/Plastic Ono Band was released, shocking critics with its raw honesty. It was hailed as a masterpiece of confessional rock, but its sound was still rooted in conventional song structures, however stripped down. The rhythmic speech of Rhyme remained unheard. The 1970s saw the emergence of disco, punk, and new wave. Music continued to evolve, but the specific combination of rhythmic speech over a beat, delivered with raw, unadorned honesty, remained largely absent from the mainstream. Meanwhile, in the Bronx, New York, a different kind of music was beginning to emerge. In block parties and community centers, DJs were extending drum breaks, creating rhythmic loops, and MCs were speaking over them. Not singing, speaking, rapping. Cool Herc, Grandmaster Flash, Africa Bambaataa. The pioneers of hip-hop were laying the foundations of a new musical genre, drawing on traditions of Jamaican toasting, African-American oral poetry, and the rhythmic cadences of urban speech. Their music was raw, confrontational, lyrically direct, technically imperfect in ways that seemed chosen rather than accidental. It was, in every measurable way, rap music. And it was being created in a completely different cultural context, thousands of miles away from Abbey Road Studios, by artists who had no knowledge of a tape labeled Rhyme, sitting in a dusty archive in London. The world was ready for rap music in the late 1970s. The first commercial rap single, Rapper's Delight, by the Sugar Hill Gang, was released in 1979. It became a global phenomenon, introducing millions to a new form of musical expression. And still, the tape, Rhyme, remained unheard. John Lennon himself never spoke of the session. He continued to make music, to experiment, to push boundaries. But the specific form of rhythmic speech he had explored in January 1970 remained a one-off. A private experiment. A moment of raw truth that he had captured and then, for reasons unknown, decided to keep hidden from the world. Until a young archivist, during a routine inventory of Abbey Road's vast collection of uncatalogued material, stumbled upon a reel labeled Rhyme in John Lennon's handwriting. London, August 1990. Abbey Road Studios. The archive. Patricia Soulsby was 24 years old. She had been working as an assistant archivist for 2 years, meticulously cataloging the vast, often chaotic, collection of unreleased recordings, demos, and experimental sessions that filled the studio's extensive storage rooms. It was a job that required patience, precision, and a certain reverence for the ghosts of sound that inhabited the building. She was working through a section labeled Miscellaneous Demos, 1968 to 1972, a catch-all category for anything that didn't fit neatly into official album projects. It was a dusty, often frustrating section, filled with half-finished ideas and forgotten experiments. And then she found it. A plain white tape reel. No official EMI label. No detailed track listing. Just a single word, handwritten in black marker, Rhyme. And beneath it, the unmistakable signature of John Lennon. The date, scrawled in smaller script, read Jan 70. Patricia had seen enough of John Lennon's handwriting to know it was authentic. She had also seen enough Abbey Road labels to know that this was not an official release. It was something else, something private, something that had been deliberately kept outside the formal system. Her heart began to beat a little faster. This was the kind of discovery archivists dreamed of, a hidden gem, a forgotten piece of history. She took the reel to her supervisor, a grizzled veteran named Arthur Jenkins who had been with Abbey Road since the 1950s. Jenkins examined the tape, his expression unreadable. John Lennon's handwriting, he murmured. And no catalog number. Interesting. He handed it back to her. Play it, carefully, and tell me what it is. Patricia took the tape to a small, secure listening room. She threaded the reel onto an old Studer tape machine, its analog warmth a familiar comfort in the digital age. She put on a pair of headphones. She pressed play. The hiss of the tape. The raw, unpolished sound of a guitar being tuned. Then the distorted, looping riff. And over it, John Lennon's voice. Speaking. Not singing. Not reciting. Speaking. With a rhythm that was both natural and deliberate. About his mother. about his anger, about the hypocrisy of the world. Patricia listened for 3 hours. She didn't move. She didn't take notes. She simply listened, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. It was raw. It was confrontational. It was lyrically direct. It was rhythmic speech over a beat. It was rap music, recorded in Abbey Road Studios in January 1970 by John Lennon. When the tape finally ran out, the silence in the listening room was profound. Patricia removed her headphones, her hands shaking slightly. She knew, with absolute certainty, that she had just heard something that would rewrite music history. She walked back to Arthur Jenkins's office. "Well," Jenkins asked, looking up from his paperwork. "What was it? Another one of John's sound collages? A private therapy session?" Patricia looked at him. "It's rap music," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "He recorded the first rap song 20 years ago, and he hit it." Jenkins stared at her. His expression, for the first time in his long career, was completely, utterly stunned. The news of the discovery of rhyme sent shockwaves through the music world. Abbey Road Studios, after careful authentication and analysis, made a formal announcement in October 1990. The tape was presented to a select group of music historians, journalists, and hip-hop pioneers. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some dismissed it as a novelty, an interesting historical footnote, a precursor, perhaps, but not the first rap song. They argued that rap music was a cultural phenomenon, born of specific social and economic conditions in the Bronx, and could not be attributed to a single recording by a white British rock star. Others, particularly those within the hip-hop community, were intrigued. They listened to the tape with a different kind of ear. They heard the rhythmic precision, the lyrical directness, the raw, unpolished honesty that characterized early rap. Grandmaster Flash, one of the pioneers of hip-hop, listened to rhyme in a private session at Abbey Road. He sat in silence for the entire 3 hours. When it finished, he removed his headphones, his face thoughtful. "It's not what we were doing in the Bronx," he said. "The context is completely different. The sound is different. But the intention, the spirit, the idea of using your voice, speaking your truth, over a beat, without trying to be pretty, that's the same." He paused. He was doing it. In 1970, before we had a name for it, before we even knew what we were doing, he was doing it. Chuck D of Public Enemy, known for his politically charged lyrics and confrontational delivery, was more direct. John Lennon understood what rap was for before any of us did. He understood that it was supposed to be dangerous. Not dangerous in the showbiz sense. Actually dangerous. The kind of music that makes people uncomfortable because it tells them something true that they'd prefer not to hear. He paused. He just did it with a guitar and his own voice. We did it with turntables and a whole community. But the spirit is the same. The spirit of the truth. Jeff Emmerich, the engineer who had recorded Rhyme in 1970, gave his first public interview about the session after the tape's discovery. He described John's intensity, his deliberate choice to strip away all conventional musicality, his focus on raw, spoken truth. "I always knew what I heard," Emmerich said. "But knowing and being able to show are different things. The tape is the difference. It's proof that John was always looking for the next thing, always trying to find a new way to say what he needed to say, even if the world wasn't ready for it yet." The discovery of rhyme didn't rewrite the entire history of rap music. The cultural origins in the Bronx remained paramount, but it added a crucial, unexpected chapter. It demonstrated that the impulse to create rhythmic speech over a beat, to use the voice as a raw, percussive instrument for truth-telling, was an impulse that resonated across different cultural contexts, different musical traditions, and different personal experiences. It proved that John Lennon, the melodic genius of the Beatles, was also, in his own way, a pioneer of a sound that would define a new generation, and that he had hidden it from the world for 20 years. New York City, December 8, 1980. John Lennon was murdered. He never knew that the tape labeled Rhyme would be found. He never knew that the private experiment he conducted in Studio 2 in January 1970 would one day be recognized as a foundational document of a musical genre that would explode in popularity years after his death. He never knew that the raw, unadorned truth he spoke into a microphone would eventually be understood as a precursor to a global cultural phenomenon. He made it because he needed to make it. Because the truth he carried within him needed a new form of expression that melody, with its inherent prettiness, could no longer contain. He made it, labeled it, and then, for reasons unknown, decided to keep it hidden. Perhaps he knew the world wasn't ready. Perhaps he understood that the context for such a sound didn't yet exist. Perhaps he simply made it, found the truth he was looking for, and then moved on to the next thing, the act of creation itself being its own reward. Abbey Road Studios still stands. Studio 2 is still the most famous recording room in the world. It has witnessed countless sessions, countless legends, countless moments of musical history. And somewhere in its archives, carefully preserved, is a tape reel labeled Rhyme. A 3-hour recording of John Lennon speaking his truth over a beat. Raw, confrontational, rhythmic. The first rap song. It is not played often. It is not widely known outside of academic circles and dedicated music historians. It does not appear on official releases or greatest hits compilations. But its existence changes everything. It changes the story of rap music, adding an unexpected, almost mythical origin point. It changes the story of John Lennon, revealing a depth of experimental foresight that even his most ardent admirers had not fully appreciated. And it leaves behind a question that continues to echo through the quiet halls of Abbey Road. What other truths did John Lennon record and hide from the world? What other sounds did he create that are still waiting to be discovered? What other futures did he glimpse, alone in a recording studio, that the rest of us are still catching up to? The tape, Rhyme, is a testament to the idea that the most revolutionary things are often created quietly, alone, in the smallest available room, by people who are simply following an urgent, internal need to express something true, regardless of whether the world has a name for it yet. And sometimes, the world has to wait. For 20 years. For a young archivist to stumble upon a dusty reel. For the whisper in the archive to finally become a shout. The official history of rap music begins in the Bronx, in the late 1970s, with DJs and MCs, and block parties. It is a powerful, undeniable history. But somewhere in a London archive, on a tape labeled in John Lennon's handwriting, with a single, enigmatic word, is 3 hours of evidence that the impulse to speak truth over a beat was already there, in 1970, in a quiet studio, in the mind of a man who was dismantling everything he thought he knew about music and finding something new in the wreckage, something that had no name yet, something that would, 20 years later, and change the world. The end. If this story about the hidden origins of musical revolutions, the courage to create without recognition, and the profound discovery that the future was already being built in a room nobody knew about moved you, subscribe and leave that powerful like below. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the most revolutionary things are often created quietly, alone, in the smallest available room. What piece of music has made you feel like you were hearing something completely new, even if it was old? Tell us in the comments below.